There is a particular kind of woman the world keeps underestimating. She doesn't announce herself. She doesn't make speeches. She doesn't post cryptic captions or call her friends at midnight sobbing into a phone while mascara tracks down her face like evidence. She just watches. She listens. She files things away in the drawer behind her sternum, where she keeps everything that matters: receipts, memories, the specific weight of a moment she knows she'll need later. Jade Ellison was that kind of woman. She was 31 years old, 5'6", with locks that fell past her shoulders and a mind that worked the way good architecture works, quietly, structurally, holding everything up without making a show of the load it was carrying. She was a freelance interior designer by trade, which meant she had spent the better part of a decade walking into broken spaces and seeing not what they were, but what they could become if someone cared enough to do the work. That skill, the ability to see potential where others saw failure, had served her professionally in ways she could measure. It had served her personally in ways she could not. She had applied it to Kevin Marshall for 3 years. That was the part she would never quite forgive herself for. Kevin was tall, broad-shouldered, the kind of physically beautiful that made strangers generous and friends overlook things they shouldn't. He had a smile that arrived slightly before the rest of him entered a room and a confidence that read as competence until you spent enough time watching him up close to understand the difference. He worked in sales enterprise software, corporate accounts, numbers he could describe compellingly at dinner parties without anyone asking too many follow-up questions. He made decent money. He spent more of it than he made. He had a credit score that was, as the mortgage broker had noted 2 years into their relationship, marginally better than Jade's. That marginally better credit score became the legal architecture of everything that followed. They moved in together in the spring, into a 3-bedroom terrace in a neighborhood that was just beginning to tip from overlooked to desirable. The mortgage went in Kevin's name because the broker said it would simplify the application, and Jade had agreed because, at 29, in love, splitting her life open and pouring it into a shared future, whose name sat on which document had felt like paperwork, like a formality between two people building something together, like it didn't matter. She understood now, of course, that it mattered enormously. She understood now that the person whose name is on the document is the person the law recognizes as holding the thing. She understood now that love is not a legal instrument. But she hadn't understood it then, standing in an empty house that smelled like old paint and possibility, watching Kevin tap the door frame with his knuckle and say, "We're going to make this something," and believing him completely. She made it something. That was the part he would eventually erase from the official record of events. The first mortgage payment came due in May. Kevin said his commission check had been delayed, something about a deal closing late, a client pushing sign-off to the following quarter. Jade transferred the money from her savings without making it into a conversation. She told herself it was temporary. It was the first month these things happened. The second month, Kevin said something about an investment that hadn't matured yet. Jade covered the payment again. By the fourth month, she had stopped waiting for the explanation and simply set up an automatic transfer because the mortgage not being paid was not a consequence she was willing to accept when she was the one sleeping in the house, breathing the air inside it, laying her body down in it every night. She kept every bank statement. She didn't do it consciously. At first it was just how she was built, organized the way someone is organized when they grew up watching their mother stretch grocery money across a week and learned early that the receipts are the only version of reality that can't be argued with. She kept a folder in the bottom drawer of her desk, manila envelope inside, labeled with the month and year. 27 months of them, by the time everything ended. She would never tell Kevin about the folder. It would have changed his behavior, and she needed his behavior to remain consistent. She renovated the kitchen in the autumn of their first year. She did this not because Kevin asked her to. Kevin had said he liked the kitchen fine, which was the kind of thing a person says about a space they have never truly inhabited. The cabinets were cheap laminate, already splitting at the hinges. The layout made cooking feel like a puzzle you solved wrong every time. She found a woman in the city who made small terracotta tiles by hand, warm, irregular squares that caught light differently depending on the hour, and she spent 3 weekends in conversation with this woman before placing an order. She negotiated the price down by 14%, which was not a small number. She oversaw the installation herself because the fitter kept trying to cut corners she had explicitly, specifically, repeatedly told him not to cut. Kevin came into the kitchen one evening while she was on her knees, realigning a grout line, and said the tiles were a bit orange. She looked up at him. She said nothing. She went back to the grout line. She painted 4 rooms. Not because she couldn't afford contractors, she had gotten the quotes, looked at the numbers, looked at her own hands, and decided she could do it better for less money, which turned out to be true on both counts. She tested every color in 3 different kinds of light: morning light, lamp light, the flat gray light of a Tuesday afternoon when the sky is pressing down and you need a room that holds rather than collapses. She chose colors that worked on the difficult days, not just the good ones. This was something she had learned from years of designing spaces for other people, that a room has to function in all emotional weather, not just the kind that shows up in photographs. Kevin told people she had an eye for decorating. He said it the way people say someone has a nice singing voice, appreciative, in a way that subtly reduces what they're describing to a hobby, a talent, something pleasant but not serious. Jade heard him say it at a dinner party when she was refilling her wine in the kitchen and he didn't know she was within earshot, and she stood there for a moment with the bottle in her hand and thought, "So that's the story you're telling." She went back to the dining room. She poured wine into everyone's glass. She smiled. She filed it away. The garden she built from the ground up the following spring. The backyard had been a flat rectangle of compacted dirt and patchy grass when they moved in the kind of outdoor space that communicates that nobody who lived here cared about the outside of things. Jade went to a Saturday market and spent 3 hours walking the stalls before she found the seedlings she wanted. She came home with lavender and rosemary and a climbing rose that she trained along the back fence with wire she sourced from a hardware store the following Tuesday. She planted everything herself on a Saturday while Kevin was inside watching football. He came out once to ask if she wanted a drink. She said yes. He went back inside and forgot. The rose bloomed the following June. She photographed it. She did not show Kevin the photograph. By the 2nd year, Kevin had developed a story. It arrived gradually, not in one speech but in scattered remarks, casual enough to seem like passing observations rather than the construction of an alternate history. Jade doesn't really do much around the house, said at a pub table with a little laugh, as though it were gently affectionate rather than a rewrite. "She's lucky I keep the lights on, honestly," said at a barbecue to a man named Marcus, who had once watched Jade spend 4 hours rehanging every door in the house because the frames had settled and none of them were closing properly. Marcus had said nothing. He'd looked at Kevin the way you look at someone saying something so wrong, it takes your brain a moment to process the distance between the statement and the truth. He told Jade about it 3 months later, at a dinner party, his face already apologetic. "I thought you knew he was saying that stuff. I should have said something at the time." Jade had looked at him steadily and said, "It's okay, Marcus," and moved the conversation to something else. She had gone to the bathroom afterward and stood at the mirror for 60 seconds. Then she'd washed her hands and gone back to the table and been perfectly present for the rest of the evening, because Jade Ellison did not process her pain in public. She processed it in the car on the way home, alone, with the radio off. She had known the relationship was ending before Kevin knew he was ending it. The body carries information, the mind is still negotiating a low-level signal, a frequency just below articulation. She had felt it in herself for months. The small withdrawals, the way she had stopped describing her plans to him, the way she made decisions about the house without consulting him, not out of hostility, but out of an instinct that understood before she did that she was building something she was going to be living in alone. 2 days before Kevin's Tuesday evening speech, she packed a suitcase. She told herself she was reorganizing the wardrobe, but the passport was in the front pocket. and the phone charger was coiled on top, and she had packed the way a person packs when some part of them is already standing at a door they haven't opened yet. She put the suitcase in the hallway closet and went back to her desk and sent 3 work emails. When Kevin came home on Tuesday and delivered the speech he had rehearsed in the car, she could always tell when he'd rehearsed. Something. There was a particular rhythm to it, a practiced cadence. She stood in the kitchen she had designed and listened to him tell her that it wasn't working, that she needed to go, that his name was on the house and hers wasn't, and could she please leave her key on the table when she left. She thought about the 27 months of mortgage payments. She thought about the terracotta tiles. She thought about the rose on the back fence. She thought about all of it in the space of 4 seconds, and then she looked at Kevin's face and understood that none of it was going to change what happened next. He had already decided what she was worth. The receipts in her folder were facts, not arguments, and facts have never changed a mind that was made up for reasons that had nothing to do with facts. She went to the hallway. She got the suitcase from the closet. She came back to the kitchen, took her key from her pocket, and placed it on the table exactly where he had told her to. She looked at the yellow curtains in the living room, the ones she had found at a market stall on a cold Saturday morning. Exactly the right shade of warm, the specific yellow she had been carrying in her mind for 3 months before she found it, and she held their color in her eyes for one long second. Then she opened the front door and walked out. She stood on the pavement. Outside, the street was quiet. The light from the living room came through those yellow curtains and made a warm rectangle on the ground outside. Jade was standing in the dark, on the wrong side of her own light. She called her sister. Simone answered before the second ring. She always did, at night. It was an agreement they'd never spoken aloud, but had never once broken an architecture of sisterhood, load-bearing and silent. "He told me to leave," Jade said. "One beat. Where are you?" "Outside. Don't move." Simone arrived in 22 minutes. She got out of the car, looked at Jade standing on the pavement with a suitcase and her coat buttoned wrong, and said nothing. She put the suitcase in the trunk. She put Jade in the passenger seat. She drove to her flat in the kind of silence that isn't empty, the kind that has weight and intention and love moving through it. They sat at Simone's kitchen table with tea. Jade told her what Kevin had been saying, about the freeloader narrative, about Marcus, about the dinner party 3 months ago where she had learned from someone else's embarrassment that her partner had been dismantling her character in public for the better part of a year. Simone set her mug down with the careful deliberateness of a woman choosing not to say the first thing that came to her. "The mortgage came from my account every month," Jade said. "The kitchen, the tiles, the painting, all of it came from me." "I know," Simone said. "Do you know about the curtains?" Simone looked at her directly. "You called me from a market stall 18 months ago," she said. "You said you'd found exactly the right shade of yellow. You sounded like someone who had just solved something that had been sitting in the back of their mind for weeks." Jade looked at her tea. "They were the right shade," she said. "I know they were." They sat there until the tea went cold and the night pressed all the way in against the windows, and Jade did not make a plan and did not strategize and did not build the outline of a response because she wasn't ready for any of that yet. She went to Simone's spare room and lay on top of the covers with her coat still on and looked at the ceiling. Before she closed her eyes, she sent Kevin one message: "I hope you know what you just did." He read it at 11:14 p.m. He did not reply. She did not expect him to. She had not written it for a reply. She had written it because some things need to be said into the record even when no one acknowledges them. The record, as she had learned, has a way of surfacing eventually. She turned off her phone and went to sleep in her sister's spare room with a suitcase on the floor and 27 months of receipts in a manila envelope 3 miles away in a house that had her fingerprints on every surface and someone else's name on the deed. She slept well, as it turned out. Better than Kevin did, she would later learn, though she never mentioned that to anyone. Kevin moved fast after she left. The way people move when they're trying to outrun a silence that's already closing in behind them. Within a week, he changed the locks. Within 2 weeks, he had rearranged the living room furniture and purchased a new duvet set charcoal gray, chosen in 10 minutes at a homeware store, the kind of choice that communicates I am not thinking about color in any light, let alone 3. He took the yellow curtains down. He put up white ones. The room became immediately, noticeably flatter, though he would not have been able to articulate why. He told the story everywhere he went. She was dead weight. She contributed nothing. I carried her for years, and she left when things got real. He delivered it at pubs and work lunches and a neighborhood barbecue where 3 of the guests had eaten food Jade had cooked in that kitchen and had sat in those rooms while they were warm and working and could remember with perfect clarity who had held that house together. They said nothing. People rarely challenge a man who delivers his revision of events with the particular confidence of someone who has already decided the jury is on his side. The story spread through their shared social circle the way all convenient narratives spread, not because people believed it entirely, but because correcting it required an investment most people weren't prepared to make. Priya Sharma moved in 3 weeks later. She was 28, a junior account manager at a firm across town, and she came into this relationship carrying nothing except a weekend bag, a genuine belief that she was beginning something new, and Kevin's version of events, which she had been receiving in carefully curated installments for the past 6 weeks, from the point, that is, when Kevin had told her he was single, which was approximately 14 days before he technically was. Priya was not a bad person. This is important. She was a woman who had fallen for a man who gave her a specific story and no reason to doubt it. She walked through the front door of a house she had been told belonged to a man who had built his life with care and good taste. And she looked around at the kitchen and the warm-colored walls and the garden visible through the back window, a little overgrown, but clearly once loved, the structure of something intentional, still visible beneath the neglect, and she felt the particular pleasure of a woman who believes she has made a good choice. She had no idea she was standing inside someone else's devotion. She unpacked her clothes into closets Jade had organized. She cooked in the kitchen Jade had renovated. She slept in the bedroom Jade had painted, though Kevin, in a move that revealed more about his relationship to Jade's presence than he understood, had repainted it immediately after she left, covering the warm blue-gray she had chosen, with a flat, cold, institutional white that made the room feel like a waiting room. Priya noticed the walls felt cold but assumed it was the light. She bought a lamp. The problems arrived quietly at first, the way structural failures always do. By month 6, the kitchen sink had developed a slow drip from the fitting underneath. Priya mentioned it. Kevin said he'd call a plumber. She mentioned it again, 2 weeks later. He said it was on his list. By month 8, she had placed a ceramic bowl under the drip and was emptying it every morning before work, a small, absorbing ritual of compensating for something broken that should have been fixed. What Priya did not know was that the sink had not dripped a single day while Jade lived there, because Jade had replaced the washer herself one Tuesday evening, 16 months before she left. After noticing the first hint of a slow drip and dealing with it in the same way she dealt with everything in that house immediately, quietly, and without making it anyone else's problem, she asked about repainting the bedroom. The flat white was getting to her. She'd started waking up before her alarm just to avoid lying in that light longer than necessary. Kevin said he'd get paint samples. Months passed. The walls stayed white. The heating system ran inconsistently, 2 rooms warm, 2 rooms freezing, the kind of asymmetry that suggested an unaddressed zone valve issue. Kevin said it had always been that way. This was technically true in the sense that anything that exists is true in the present tense. What Kevin did not mention was that the heating had functioned correctly for the first 2 years of the house, because Jade had called a plumber twice about the zone valve and had stood in the utility room with him, explaining what she was hearing, and had followed up until it was resolved, because a house that is cold in winter is a house that is failing at its most basic function. The garden retreated season by season. Priya could see it happening but had no map of what had been there. She didn't know where the lavender was, or that the climbing rose on the back fence needed cutting back in February, or that the herbs by the south-facing wall needed more water than the ones in the shade. She could see shape disappearing, the sense of a design becoming formless, but without knowing what the design had been. She had no reference point for restoration. She bought a small pot of basil from a supermarket and put it on the kitchen windowsill. It died in 2 weeks. Kevin, to his credit, appeared entirely unbothered by any of it. This was not performance, it was genuine. Kevin had a capacity for not noticing the slow deterioration of things that was, in its own way, remarkable. He was not cruel about it. He didn't withhold care intentionally. He simply moved through spaces without maintaining them, without registering their needs, without understanding that a house is not a photograph of itself, but a living system that requires continuous attention or begins, quietly and persistently, to come apart. He had lived with Jade for 3 years and had not understood this about her. He thought she liked fixing things. He thought she enjoyed painting rooms. He thought the garden was a hobby. He had no framework for understanding that what she had been doing every month, every weekend, every quiet Tuesday evening alone in a utility room, explaining a zone valve problem to a plumber, was love in its most material, least glamorous form. He had mistaken labor for preference. He had mistaken devotion for pastime. And then he had looked at the result of that devotion and called it his. Jade's 2 years after leaving were not dramatic. She would have found drama insulting. She rented a small flat, 2 rooms, a bathroom, a window that looked out over a street that was loud in the mornings and quiet by 9 p.m., which she preferred. The overhead light was harsh, so she bought a second-hand lamp from a charity shop on her first Saturday because she refused, on principle, to live under harsh light. She found a solid oak dining table at an estate sale, slightly too big for the space, technically, but it felt right under her hands, and she kept it because she had spent enough of her life making decisions based on what fit rather than what was right. She saved money with a specific number in mind. She wrote it on a piece of paper and pinned it to the inside of her wardrobe door, where she saw it every morning between getting dressed and leaving for work. It was not a dream number, it was an exact number, derived from a spreadsheet, accounting for a 10% deposit on a property in the price range she had researched, plus closing costs, plus a renovation budget, because she was realistic about what she could afford and what she would be willing to do to a space she didn't own. She watched the gap close. She didn't talk about it much. Simone came on Sundays and they had lunch, and once, early on, Jade mentioned the number. Simone nodded. And they talked about other things, because the savings target was a fact, not a personality, and Jade had always understood the difference. She started looking at properties in the 14th month. Not aspirationally, she had a budget and she stayed inside it, because the budget was real and her feelings about it were irrelevant. She visited houses alone on weekday evenings, which she preferred because agents try harder to sell when they sense enthusiasm, and she didn't want to be sold. She paid attention to the light and the structural bones and the feel of empty rooms, because she had learned that rooms have feelings before you put anything in them, and you need to be honest about what you're actually standing inside before you start imagining what it could become. She found it after 4 months of looking. A 3-bedroom terrace on a quiet street. 1 more bedroom than she needed. But the price was right, and she liked the idea of growing into space rather than out of it. There was a neglected garden at the back, and when she crouched and pressed her fingers into the soil, she could feel it was good soil, deep and dark, the kind that holds water and rewards planting. The kitchen had counter space she could actually use. The living room had a bay window that caught afternoon light in a particular way that made her stop talking mid-sentence during the viewing and simply stand in it. The estate agent waited. Jade didn't notice. Her name went on every document, every single one. She sat at the signing table and wrote her name where each arrow pointed, and each signature felt like a different thing, not just legal formality, but the physical inscription of herself into something real. This is mine. This is mine. This is mine. She spent 3 months making it hers before she invited anyone over. She tested paint colors in patches on the walls and lived with them through a full week of different light before committing. She chose furniture by sitting in it and asking herself whether she would still want it on a rainy Tuesday in February when nothing is its best self and everything has to hold on its own merits. The kitchen she organized around how she actually moved when she cooked something she had never been fully able to do in Kevin's house because the layout was fixed before she arrived. She planted the garden in April. Simone came and helped. They spent most of a Saturday on their knees in the soil, Jade explaining what went where and why, and went inside afterward with dirt under their fingernails and drank coffee at the oak table that was slightly too big and completely right. Simone looked around at the terracotta tiles behind the stove, warm, irregular, made by hand at the herbs on the windowsill, at the small brass hook beside the front door where Jade had hung her key the morning she moved in. "This is it," Simone said. "This is it," Jade said. She was looking at the key on the hook, thinking about another key, the sound it had made on a different table in a different house, the feeling of lifting her hand away from it. Her key, her hook, her door. She told Simone she wanted to have a housewarming. Invitations went to 30 people, close friends, family, the people who had shown up during the 2 years, not dramatically but steadily, in ways she didn't take for granted. She wrote the list in an hour. Kevin's name did not come up, not considered and rejected, just genuinely absent. The way a name is absent from a room it was never invited into. Kevin found out from Marcus on a Thursday. Marcus mentioned it without thinking, the way people mention things they've already processed as normal and have forgotten might land as information. Jade's having a housewarming this weekend. Kevin heard the word housewarming and constructed a picture in his mind. Small, flat, cheap wine, brave face on something modest, the narrative of a woman starting from scratch with what little she had after years of coasting on someone else's stability. He imagined walking in and being gracious about it. "We should go," he told Priya that evening. "Show support." Priya paused. "We weren't invited." "It'll be fine," Kevin said, with the certainty of a man who had never walked into a room and found it wasn't arranged in his favor. Priya hesitated. She had been receiving Kevin's version of Jade for over a year, the freeloader, the passenger, the woman who had never pulled her weight. That was the only Jade she knew, delivered by the man she was sharing a life with, and she had no reason to look for another one. She got in the car on Saturday evening. They pulled up outside a terrace house on a quiet street, warm light in the bay window, music coming through the walls, the right volume, the kind that fills space without dominating it. People visible inside, moving between rooms, the specific ease of 30 people who are genuinely glad to be somewhere. Kevin rang the bell. Jade opened the door. She looked at him, then at Priya, then back at Kevin. Her face did not change. Not because she was performing composure, Jade Ellison didn't perform, but because she had known, somewhere beneath conscious thought, that this particular scene was coming. Not the specific version of it, not Kevin at her front door with a bottle of wine and a woman beside him and that particular smile on his face, but the general shape of it. The moment where everything she had built quietly would have to be visible to the person who had decided it didn't exist. She had been ready for this longer than she knew. "Kevin," she said, "we heard about the party." He held up the bottle. "Thought we'd come and celebrate." She looked at the bottle. She looked at him. She stepped back and held the door open. "Come in," she said. Simone was visible through the kitchen doorway. She saw Kevin walk through the front door, and her face did something complicated, tightened, then settled into the careful neutrality of a woman who has been planning what she would do in exactly this situation and is now activating the plan. She turned toward the kitchen. "I'll get glasses," Simone said. Jade touched her sister's arm as she passed. 1 second of pressure. Simone kept walking without looking back, but her shoulders dropped slightly. Message received. Kevin walked through the house the way he walked through everything, scanning, calculating, taking an immediate inventory. The hallway had a console table with a plant, a mirror that made the narrow space feel open, and a small brass hook beside the door with Jade's key hanging from it. He registered it but said nothing. He moved into the living room. The room stopped him, though he would not have described it that way. It was full 30 people, warm noise, the right music at the right volume, food appearing on tables before anyone had noticed it was running low. The lighting was warm and directional. The temperature was exactly right. The dark blue rug anchored the room. The bookshelves along the east wall were real books that had been read, objects that meant something. The furniture was clearly chosen to be used rather than admired. The bay window held the last of the evening light and distributed it across everything. It was a room that had been thought about, deeply, specifically, at every level. And it showed, not in a way you could point to easily, but in the way a room shows care when care has been the organizing principle of every decision inside it. Kevin stood in it and felt something he would not have been able to name. He decided to say something before the room could say it for him. Nice little place, loud enough to carry. A woman near him, her name was Kara. She had known Jade since college and had received 3 calls from her in the 2 years between leaving Kevin's house and moving into her own, turned and looked at him. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has just revealed something about themselves by accident. Then she turned back to her conversation. Kevin moved further into the room. He picked up a ceramic figure from the shelf beside the fireplace and turned it over in his hands with the casual familiarity of a man who thinks everything is available to be handled. "Not bad for starting from scratch," he said, louder now, with a small laugh calibrated to sound generous. "Though I always said you had an eye for the decorating side of things, Jade. The actual finances, the real work that was always more my area." The room didn't go silent, but it went quieter. Several conversations paused without anyone deciding to pause them. Kara turned around again. A man named Peter, who had helped Jade move a sofa into this house 3 months ago and had stayed for dinner afterward, and had heard, over the course of that evening, more of the actual story than he'd ever been told directly. Peter looked over with an expression that was entirely still. Jade was standing in the kitchen doorway with a glass of water. She looked at Kevin with an expression that was completely level. Not angry, not embarrassed, not the expression of a woman who has been caught off guard by something she wasn't prepared for. Level, present, ready. "The finances were fine," she said. Her voice was clear and calm and moved through the room without effort, the way a voice moves when it doesn't need volume to carry weight. "I have 31 months of mortgage statements that confirm that, from my account. I also have the receipts from the kitchen renovation, the painting, the garden, every receipt. All from my account, none from yours." The room went quiet, properly quiet. Kevin's smile stayed on his face the way a flag stays on a pole after the wind has already died, technically present, structurally unsupported. "Jade, come on. That's not the whole picture. I also have the statements from the joint account you stopped contributing to in month 4, Jade said. "I kept everything, Kevin. Every transfer, every receipt. I wasn't sure I'd ever need them, but I kept them." Peter set his drink down on the shelf with the particular deliberateness of a man who has decided to free his hands. Kara crossed her arms slowly. A woman near the fireplace, Diane, who had known Jade for 11 years and had sat with her on the phone on the night she called Simone and had never once told Kevin what she thought of him because Jade had asked her not to look at Kevin with an expression that had no warmth in it at all. Kevin tried a different gear. His voice dropped into something more measured, more generous. The voice of a man who has sensed that direct confrontation is not going to work and is now pivoting to managed benevolence. "I'm not here to argue about money, Jade. I came to support you. We both did. I know this has been hard." A pause, carefully weighted. "You've built something here. I can see that." Jade looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the room, at the 30 people who had been there across 2 years, quietly and consistently, who had heard Kevin's version delivered with that particular confidence at dinner parties and pubs and barbecues, and had said nothing, and were now standing very still. "You told mutual friends for 2 years that I contributed nothing," she said. "You told people I was a freeloader. You told Priya I was a passenger who coasted on your stability." Kevin's jaw moved. No words came out. She believed you because she had no reason not to. Jade looked at Priya when she said this directly, without cruelty, the way you look at someone you're choosing to address as a person rather than a prop in someone else's story. She moved into a house I paid for and a kitchen I designed and a garden I planted from bare soil, and she thought it was yours because you told her it was. Priya had been standing very still since Kevin's first comment. She was not a person who went to pieces easily. She had made it to 28 with most of her self-possession intact, had navigated her share of difficult rooms, had sat through her share of revelations. But this particular room, in this particular moment, was doing something to her that she was not fully in control of. She was reassembling a year of images and conversations and assumptions against a new frame, and the new frame was making everything look different. The kitchen tiles, the warm, irregular terracotta she had always thought showed Kevin's taste. The colors in the bedroom before he repainted it, which she had heard about from a friend of a friend who had visited before she arrived and mentioned they were beautiful. A specific blue-gray. The garden she had watched lose its shape across 4 seasons, not knowing what she was watching, disappear. She looked at Kevin. "You told me she contributed nothing," Priya said. Her voice was quiet, but the room was quiet enough to carry it. Kevin's voice dropped. "Priya, this isn't the place. The kitchen tiles in our house." She paused. "Did she choose those?" Kevin said nothing. "The colors in the bedroom before you repainted it. Did she choose those?" "Nothing." "The garden." Priya looked at him steadily. "The one I've watched go to pieces for a year because neither of us knows what was planted or where or what it needs. Did she do that?" Kevin's jaw moved again. The smile was completely gone now, not replaced by any other expression, just absent, the face beneath it looking older and somehow smaller than it had 40 minutes ago when he'd rung the doorbell holding a bottle of wine with the confidence of a man arriving somewhere he belonged. "I have been emptying a bowl under the kitchen sink every morning for 4 months, Priya said. "You told me it had always leaked." She paused. Had it always leaked, Kevin? Or did it start leaking after the person who maintained it left? The room was absolutely still. 30 people in a warmly lit terrace on a quiet street, none of them moving, all of them watching. 2 women, one who had built the thing, and one who had been told it was never built, arrive at the same conclusion at the same time. Peter, standing near the bookshelf, looked at the floor. Kara had her hand over her mouth. Diane had stopped looking at Kevin and was watching Priya with something that looked like recognition, the specific recognition of a woman who has had the ground shift beneath her and knows the feeling from the inside. Kevin straightened. He tried to find his footing and couldn't locate it. "This has gotten completely out of hand. I came here to celebrate with you, Jade. I didn't come here to be put on trial." "Nobody put you on trial." Simone's voice came from the kitchen doorway. She had come through quietly, had been standing there for the last 40 seconds, holding a glass of wine, with the composed stillness of a woman who has been waiting 2 years to say something and has spent that entire time deciding exactly when and how to say it. "You walked into her house uninvited," Simone said, "and you stood in her living room and told her room full of friends that the finances were complicated. That was your choice, Kevin. You made it. Nobody put you here." Kevin looked at Simone, then at Jade, then at the 30 people who were all, in their different ways, looking at him. He put his glass down on the shelf. He looked at Priya. "I think we should go." Priya didn't move immediately. She looked at Jade, and in her face, whatever version of Jade she had arrived with, whatever portrait Kevin had been building and adding to for the past year and a half, something was adjusting. Not being replaced entirely, not yet, but adjusting, the way a picture adjusts when you understand that the frame you've been looking at it through is wrong. "I'm sorry," Priya said. "I didn't know. I only had his version." Jade looked at her for a moment. "I know," she said. "I know you didn't." Priya picked up her bag. She walked to the front door. She did not take Kevin's arm when he offered it. Kevin walked out behind her. Jade held the door. She watched them go down the front path, Kevin walking slightly ahead, Priya not catching up. The specific distance between two people at the beginning of understanding something they haven't yet finished understanding. She closed the door. The room exhaled. Not dramatically, just the organic release of 30 people letting tension go at the same moment, like a chord resolving. Someone said something. Someone else laughed. Not cruelly. Just the sound of a room returning to itself. Diane came and stood beside Jade and put her arm around her shoulders without saying anything. Peter picked his drink back up. Simone appeared beside her, shoulder to shoulder. "You kept the receipts," Simone said. "I always keep everything," Jade said. Simone looked at her for 1 second, just one. The length of a recognition between two people who have known each other long enough not to need more than that. Then she went back to the kitchen, and Jade went back to her guests, and the party found its rhythm again. Warmer now. Easier. The way a room feels after something true has been said in it. Not lighter, exactly, but more honest, which is better than lighter anyway. In the car, Priya looked out the window and did not speak. Kevin drove in the dense silence of a man replaying something and finding that no matter which angle he approaches it from, it keeps coming out the same way. They pulled into the driveway of the house on Elmwood Road. Priya looked at it. She had looked at this house hundreds of times. She had never looked at it like this. The overgrown front corner where something had once been growing. The window frame that had needed repainting since September. The crack in the front path she stepped over every morning. She got out of the car. She went straight to the kitchen. She opened the cabinet under the sink. The bowl was there. She had emptied it that morning. There was already an inch of water in it. She stood looking at it for a long time. Then she went to bed. She lay in the pale, cold bedroom and looked at the ceiling and thought about what it means to move into a life someone else built and call it yours without knowing what you're calling yours. She thought about a woman standing in a warm room, surrounded by 30 people, calm and clear, and completely certain of her own ground, saying, "I kept everything, Kevin. Every transfer, every receipt." She thought about what it would feel like to be that certain, that prepared, that quietly, systematically, over years, ready. She thought about the bowl under the sink. She did not sleep quickly. The last guest left Jade's housewarming just before 11. Jade stood at the front door and hugged her aunt and watched the taxi pull away, and then closed the door and stood in the quiet of her house, not empty, never empty, settled, and began to collect glasses. She carried them to the kitchen. She stood at the counter. She turned on the tap. Water came immediately. Cold, clear, instant. She turned it off. She put the kettle on and stood at the window while it heated. The garden was dark outside, but she knew every inch of it, what was planted, what needed attention, what was thriving, what she was going to move next weekend when the light shifted. She made tea. She took it to the living room. She sat in the chair she had chosen because when she sat in it in the shop, she had known immediately, not hoped, not decided, known that it was right. Her back settled. Her arms rested where they wanted to. She looked at the room. Walls she had chosen, rugs she had chosen, books she had read, objects on the shelves that meant something to her and would mean nothing to a stranger, which was exactly how she wanted it. She allowed herself to think about Kevin for one moment, just one. She thought about the pavement and the cold and the yellow light she had been standing outside of. She thought about the key on the table and the sound it made and the particular feeling of lifting her hand away from it and making herself leave it there. She looked across the room at her key on the hook by the front door, small brass, catching the lamplight. She finished her tea. She got up, crossed the room, turned off the lamp, picked up the key on her way past, felt its weight in her palm, familiar, specific, hers. She put it back on the hook. She went to bed. Some things you build once and they hold forever. A reputation, a record, the kind of self that doesn't need the room to go quiet before it tells the truth. Jade Ellison had spent 3 years making something beautiful in a space where her name wasn't on anything. And then she had spent 2 more years making something permanent in a space where her name was on everything. And she had done both without announcing herself or performing her patience or waiting for anyone to acknowledge the work. The acknowledgement came anyway, in the end. In a warmly lit room, on a quiet street, in front of 30 people, in the specific silence that falls when a truth arrives that has been a long time getting there. Kevin will not fix the sink. He never fixed anything. He moved through spaces other people built and called them his, and convinced himself, through the sheer repetition of the story, that the telling was the same as the doing. He will keep not fixing things. The bedroom will stay cold. The garden will keep retreating from the shape Jade gave it, one season at a time, until it belongs to nobody, which was, in a way, always the most honest thing about it. Priya will make a decision. That one is her own story, still being written. And Jade will water her garden on Thursday morning. She'll notice the lavender needs moving, the light has shifted, and she knows what lavender needs. She'll move it Saturday. She'll make tea afterward and sit at the oak table that's slightly too big and entirely right. In a kitchen where everything works, because she made sure it would. In a house where every document carries her name. She built it. It holds. That was always going to be the ending. She just had to wait long enough for the room to catch up.